I've seen the Cincinnati Bengals be a lot of different things during my lifetime as a professional football fan. As I was growing up as a little shorty, I saw the Bengals be very good, actually make a Super Bowl, get this close to beating Joe Montana and the San Francisco 49ers in said Super Bowl. I also saw the Bengals of the 90s that were affectionately called the Bungles, and understandably so, because they were bad. That whole organization, that whole decade of the 90s was just terribly bad. Do I need to bring up the coaching regimes of Coslet and LeBeau and Shula? I don't think so. Bengals fans know what I'm talking about. Now, in the 2000s and into the 2010 range, you got Marvin Lewis to come in. And this organization, it seemed like for a time, was starting to get things figured out. Then they scuffled their feet for a couple of seasons. And, I was starting to wonder if the Browns were the Bengals were going to move on once and for all from Marvin Lewis. But I give owner Mike Brown a lot of credit and the Cincinnati Bengals organization a lot of credit because they stood by Marvin Lewis and they stuck with him and rode it out with him when a lot of other organizations wouldn't have. See a team in their own division, the Cleveland Browns is a perfect example. Marvin Lewis has now coached 11 seasons in Cincinnati. I didn't think he would ever get to this point. And it's kind of funny now when you look at the Bengals. They've gone from a team that's been a joke and a team that was affectionately called the Bungles for so many years to being a team now that their fan base is very disappointed because now it's not a thing of them not being able to make the playoffs because they have. They've made it 3 straight years. But it's that burden of expectations that comes with repeated playoff performances. Now they're getting frustrated and upset because the Bengals can't win a playoff game and, seem to have their season end too early. It's ironic how things change, and it's ironic how time changes a lot of different things. It changes perspectives on organizations. Now, before this season, actually heading into the aftermath of the 2012 season, I was incredibly high on the Cincinnati Bengals, and I was calling for them to be a real team to watch in the AFC and was crowning them as a definite Super Bowl contender in that conference. I did. Heading into the 2013 season, I felt the same way. With all the talk of the Denver Broncos and the New England Patriots and the usual suspects, I'm like, look out for the Bengals. Look out for the Bengals. And to me, as the season played out, I still kind of felt that. And even obviously heading into the playoffs, I made a stupid choice of, for some reason, believing in an Andy Dalton-led team, thinking he was going to have a Joe Flacco type of postseason, and thought the Cincinnati Bengals were actually going to make it to the Super Bowl. Yeah, but when you look at the Bengals, this is a talented roster, both on the offensive and the defensive side of the football. This looks like one of the most well balanced, complete football teams in all of the National Football League. Now, a lot of the angst and consternation about this Bengals organization and how their 2013 season finished the same way the 2012 season finished, the same way the 2011 season finished, is going to primarily fall all on starting quarterback Andy Dalton, which is understandable, but not entirely fair. A lot of it is fair, but not all of it. It goes deeper than just Andy Dalton. But you look at the Bengals, this was the third straight year that they made the playoffs. That's no small feat in today's NFL, and they should be commended for that. Marvin Lewis should be commended for that, and the whole Bengals organization should be commended for that. They won the division this year, win 11-5. Again, something to be commended for. But when you have a playoff game at home and you lose to a six-seeded Chargers team, it leads to a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty heading into this offseason. Here's what we know about the Bengals. They have a very talented defense, but they were missing some key pieces this year, namely their all-pro defensive tackle, Geno Watkins. And you could see it in that playoff game that even though this defense had talent like Michael Johnson and Vontez Burfict and Ray Maualuga, the bottom James Harrison, they had a solid linebacking core. The fact of the matter remains is there were holes in this defense, both in the secondary and I felt a little bit in their front four. They struggled at times to contain the Chargers' running game, and they definitely struggled to stop the Chargers and Phillip Rivers in the passing game. So for all the focus and emphasis that's going to be placed on Andy Dalton in this offseason, and understandably so, that's not telling the entire story. Michael Johnson, former third-round pick out of Georgia Tech, didn't have the greatest year. And you just kind of wonder, is he going to be brought back? Marcus Hunter, second-round pick in this past draft, really didn't get much of a chance to play, and when he did, he didn't play all that well. Like I said, Geno Atkins is going to be coming off of a major knee injury heading into 2014. How's he going to be? You just gave this guy big money, basically, to tear his ACL, which is a shame, because he was obviously one of the premier players at his position in all of the National Football League. And I don't care what anybody says. When you lose a guy of that caliber and that talent, it's really hard to fill that gap. It's really hard to replace that. But like I said, ultimately, a lot of people are going to look at Andy Dalton and be like, what the hell? You had Gresham and Eifert at tight end. You have one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in A.J. Green to throw to. You have a nice supporting cast of characters in the backfield at Bernard and Green Ellis. You have other guys at wide receiver, namely Marvin Jones, that stepped up and played very nicely this year. Dalton, it seems like in theory, has the pieces he needs to get it done, and he just can't get it done. And, this will bode an interesting question. When you look at the Bengals, they spent a second-round pick in Andy Dalton in 2011. He's been their starter all 3 years. They've made the playoffs all 3 years. So obviously he's been good enough to get him there. But the Bengals in this offseason are going to have to make a real decision and a potentially franchise-changing decision. Is Andy Dalton really going to be the man for them? Is he going to be their franchise quarterback? Is he going to be the one that they stand behind and say, we ride or die with this guy? Because Andy Dalton has games that he looks like $1 million and he looks like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And then he has other games where he's throwing the ball all over the place and making horrible decisions, and you're like, this guy shouldn't even be starting in the National Football League. Too much inconsistency. You could probably go with a little less of the spectacular if you got a lot more of the solid. And I think a lot of Bengals fans would agree with that. So heading into this offseason, the Bengals are going to have to make a choice. Where they're sitting at with the 24th pick in the first round, it may very well be possible that a quarterback like a Derek Carr is going to be available, or a guy in the second round like a Zach Mettenberger or a Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be available. Are they going to draft one of those guys and bring in some competition for Andy Dalton? Are they going to sign somebody in the offseason or trade for somebody in the offseason to come in and push Andy Dalton in a quarterback competition in camp? Are they going to ride with this guy and make a statement that he is their man no matter what? Or are they going to position themselves to potentially be able to be ready to move on from Andy Dalton? Because coming up pretty soon, the Bengals are going to have a hell of a decision to make on whether or not they're going to tie up a lot of money long term into a guy that, frankly, at this point, hasn't played like he fully deserves it. So in this offseason, they have that quarterback question to address. But I think they have some other areas of deficiency that they need to address as well. Like I said, Michael Johnson, are they going to keep him or are they going to let him go? They could probably use a little bit more on that defensive line. Is Geno Atkins going to come back and be the same old Geno Atkins that he had been in the past? That's an interesting question. Their secondary, I feel like, could definitely use an infusion of youth and talent at corner, and in particular, an impact player at safety, maybe somebody like a Calvin Pryor from Louisville. Offensively, they slid Whitworth inside to left guard, which was a good thing for him and the team, but they could probably use an upgrade at left tackle. They could use another wide receiver for Andy Dalton to throw to. There are some other questions, some other holes, some other areas that need to be addressed in this offseason. I still think this Cincinnati Bengals team is very talented. And come 2014, depending on what they do in the offseason, I will probably be very high on them again. But ultimately, it's going to come down to, addressing some of these other areas and making a statement and a stand either behind Andy Dalton or away from Andy Dalton. It would be a shame to see this Bengals team that has made the playoffs 3 straight years never be able to get it figured out and not be able to get to the big game. It would be a shame. But, that's kind of what it's looking like right now. If the Bengals don't do something to change the formula, to shake shit up a little bit, they're going to go right around next year in 2014, win 10, 11 games, make the playoffs, maybe win the division, and then bow out in the first round. And in my opinion, if you continue to do that, then you're never going to be a championship contender. And if you're not contending for a championship, the worst thing you can do to me is just be mediocre. And even making the playoffs every year and losing in the first round, that to me is mediocre. You might as well blow the whole thing up and start all over again. But the Bengals are too talented of a team to do that. So they need to hurry up, figure out if Dalton's their guy or not, and get some other pieces on that team and prepare themselves to make a deeper run in the 2014 NFL season.